Welcome to the Authority File, the podcast where you'll hear conversations with academic librarians, technologists, researchers, and authors whose work is laying the foundation for higher education's future. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In this four-part series, which is brought to you with support from Wilfrid Laurier University Press, we'll be speaking with the co-editors of the new book, The Contemporary Leonard Cohen, Response, Reappraisal, and Rediscovery. Kate Pinder, Associate Professor in the Department of English and Theatre at Acadia University, where she teaches Canadian Literature and Literary Theory, and Joel Deshay, Associate Professor of Canadian Literature and Film at Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland, joined my colleague and Choice's digital media producer Sabrina Kofer to discuss the Canadian musician, poet, and novelist Leonard Cohen. The book examines Cohen as an artist through a contemporary lens, allowing contributors a chance to, as the book's subtitle notes, reappraise and rediscover his creative output and influence in a post-20th century context. Sabrina, Kate, and Joel talk about how the book came together and take time to explain several of Cohen's works and show how a contemporary critical stance on Cohen illuminates his work in a very different light. In this final episode of our four-part series, Sabrina and her guests dive into Cohen's impact, including how his so-called secular sainthood connects him to modern fandom and modern artists, such as boygenius, who named a song after him.
In the book, the idea of Cohen as a secular saint comes up, particularly in his connection to the city of Montreal. So, Joel, could you talk about Cohen as a secular saint and how that connects to modern fandom culture?
Yeah, definitely. The idea at the core of celebrity studies, especially in its earlier phases, was that celebrity was a kind of depreciated state that would have begun with something like heroism in some older time. But
Hmm.
because of media, it was no longer glorifying great deeds, but the appearances of greatness. This was um, a trend in early celebrity studies that has eventually become like you know recontextualized by acknowledgement of the real work that goes into becoming and maintaining celebrity today. It's not easy, I don't think, and not everybody can do it. But this idea that heroism had degraded into celebrity is, I think, really important for understanding Cohen's own probably almost always ironic sense of his own religiosity. Except that, in 1996, I think it was, he was ordained a Buddhist monk. So he was serious enough about religion to pursue it along a difficult path of Zen, which is not an easy acculturation into Japanese and Chinese religions, right? It's a very arduous form of religion that requires a lot of discipline. So, having said that, yeah, there's this degradation, but also this achievement of Zen in Cohen's work. Um, it's from the more cultural studies and I guess popular reception of Cohen in the 1960s, where he gets this moniker of the secular saint or the pop saint. And I think it was probably Michael Ondaatje in 1970 in his book called Leonard Cohen, where we get that phrase, the pop saint, to talk about Cohen. And the notion that heroism had degraded was going hand in hand with the notion that religion had degraded. And that by the 1960s, with the postmodernist writers and the counterculture, the beats, the protests, all of those things were attacking forms of authority, institutions of authority, including the churches in
Right.
the Western world. And so we have to sort of understand that Cohen's religiosity is in the context of degraded heroism and degraded religion, and a kind of, therefore, ironic elevation in popular culture. We can't think of it as just again, I think Kate had used the word pure to talk, or purity to talk about Cohen's status. Cohen himself would never have accepted that, and I don't think that you can think of it that way in celebrity studies or fandom. And one of the things that I think this is a real contribution of our book, it's that I think that the people who really became fans and stayed fans of Cohen recognized in his work that this is somebody who had survived a lot. He had survived these degradations, right? He had gone into what Kate quoted as the dung pile, right? He was covered in it and survived and kind of came out the other end. And in fact, the conclusion of our book quotes a line from one of my favorite late Cohen songs, where Cohen's voice describes himself as the brief elaboration of a tube. and I can only think of that in terms of the digestive system, right?
Right.
That's really all we are. We're just the tail end of that. Now, I was just thinking about this in preparation for today's podcast, but I wonder if YouTube was in the back of his mind too. There's just a figure in the newest media, a blip on the radar in the billions of clicks. I think that sense of humility that comes from the context of degraded heroism and degraded religion is really strong in Cohen, and a bunch of our chapters get at that in different ways. Joan Angel's chapter on his visual art and the humility of the self-portraits, Brian Traherne's chapter on the guilt in Cohen, my chapter, Kate's chapters. I mean, there's a lot of that in the book that recognizes Cohen's humility and also his ability to survive those degradations, and our appreciation of that. So I think the fandom aspect connects a lot to that sense of not being as good as we once were, and Cohen helps us to recognize that in ourselves, and that's one of the reasons we love him.
Yeah. Great. So, the band boygenius released a song this year titled Leonard Cohen, which quotes Cohen's famous line, "There's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in," while also poking fun at him and his, quote, "horny poetry." This is just one example of Cohen's influence on modern artists, but could you talk about Cohen's enduring legacy and impact on the music scene? And I just find this example particularly interesting since it both reveres and laughs at Cohen as an artist and a public figure. And Kate, maybe we could start with you.
I would love if you started with me because I love Boy Genius. I love the song. And also, I think they call him an old man writing horny poetry, which makes it even more funny. I think Cohen would love this song. I think he would love that juxtaposition. He was always poking fun at himself. And if you saw him in concerts, like Joel and I saw him in concert in Montreal, and I remember him talking about how you reach a certain age and you can't, when you go into hotels and there's the mirror that will give you like a close up of your pores. And I remember him saying, once you turn 70, you can't look in that mirror anymore because it's too disturbing. So, Cohen knew he was old. He knew he wrote horny poetry. And the song is funny too, because it's about two people connecting over Leonard Cohen. And I think they even like get lost, right? They're like in a car and they get caught up in the song or their relationship enough to not, the person in the passenger seat does not tell the person driving they're going the wrong way. And so that's kind of a beautiful image too. And I think that this is maybe, I mean, I'm not a music scholar, so I don't know how important Cohen's legacy is for modern musicians. But what I'm interested in really is how these citations and collaborations create new work. So I've really been interested in, making new work, affirming life, getting at the difficult stuff in a way that can like still create art and have people, write poetry, whether it's horny or not. And so I think that there's a long list of musicians and other artists who collaborate with Cohen in this way. And I do think it's a kind of collaboration because they're picking up on aspects of his reputation and his catalog of works, and then they're making them their own. So this is not a cover that boygenius has. It's an illusion or a collaboration, I might say. I was saying before we started recording that, I also love the Lana Del Rey song Mariner's Apartment Complex, which has a refrain that's just the line, I'm your man, I'm your man. There's no other references to Cohen, but why is Lana Del Rey in a song that's otherwise about being kind of discounted as a woman, because she's a woman, why is she saying I'm your man? And I think it's because she's invoking that song from Cohen. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how artists turn Cohen into something that is interesting and useful to them. And I want to write about that and see what happens, because as our book kind of shows, when we think about it, like there's Cohen's career changes, our understanding of Cohen's career changes over time. And so we're in a new phase of Cohen's scholarship. But that also means we get to like understand what it means to think about or think with Cohen today. So I might also think about Cohen's own response to some of more recent artists. Like he has this poem about Kanye West. And that has a certain meaning to us today that it might not have had for Cohen when he wrote it, because we have an understanding of Kanye West and of Leonard Cohen that changes across time. And so that's kind of what I'm interested in.
I totally agree with everything Kate's saying here. And the other example that had come to mind when I heard the question was a line that was not from, Leonard Cohen in a hotel room in his 70s as an old man, but a line that he wrote in his 50s, I think, when he says, I ache in the places where I used to play. And it's easy to think of that as a line in a song about the sexuality of the body. But to come back to Lana Del Rey and boygenius, what if it's about feeling a kind of ache, whether it's a pain or a longing, in the places where I used to play, like the art houses, the small theaters, the stadium venues, places where he would play as a musician? What if the line is about a sense of nostalgia for the places where he would sing, the towers of song, right? And the people who would occupy those places after he was gone. The sense that it's not only going to be him wowing an audience in that space, that privilege was going to be given up to somebody else next week. And I think that there is something of this appreciation for his own transience that is very existentially appealing for us writing this book, but also for the many fans that he has. Just going back to what Kate had said at a different time about the origin of the book, we started this project right after Cohen died. And so death, existence, existentialism, it's at the core of what this book is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And life. And how, given that truth about all our existence, how you continue to live and create art and those sorts of things. It's a big question.
Yeah. And speaking of Cohen's death, in a previous conversation, we talked about the Cohen estate's goal to collect all Cohen archives into one place, therefore shuttering sites of fan generated media. So, how have perspectives of Cohen changed, if at all, since his death? And how does allowing one entity to control the narrative of a figure after they've passed impact their public image and scholarship about them? And Kate, maybe start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think we're still seeing how perspectives have changed on Cohen since his death. Definitely, you kind of had immediately following Cohen's death, I think, these two dichotomous perspectives. One is the celebration of the secular saint, and then the other is someone like Myra Bloom saying there's a darker side and kind of drawing people's attention to that. And I think we're still working out the complexity of one person who can seem to be both of those things and everything in between as well. And so we've mentioned before that while we were working on the book, some of our contributors had, watched some footage from a Cohen concert or read sort of perspectives on Cohen or news articles on Cohen from these fan-generated sites that have since closed. And our understanding, though it might be incomplete or incorrect, is that part of this is a kind of move towards having a unified Cohen archive, like a one-stop shop for all of the many pages of drafts and responses and things like that. And in the introduction to The Flame, which was published posthumously, Adam Cohen talks about there being thousands of pages that haven't been archived at all. And there is an archive at the University of Toronto with Cohen's paper. So in some ways, it's really appealing to have a site, whether that's a physical site or a website, that would have all of this Cohen material. And I think that that could mean a lot for the work of both fans and scholars in the future. So I think that it also puts, if there is one place where all of this is collected, I think it also tells us that the work of people who go to that archive and think about the material there and interpret it, that should be shared as widely as possible. So even if the site itself or the archive itself is unified in some way, I think that the scholarship on that archive could be quite diverse. And that's sort of where I might focus on what I would want to see in the future for Cohen scholarship. That is, like, if we're still interested in thinking about Cohen critically, then we would need to try to make that archive, whatever it may be, open to a diversity of perspectives and make it really easy for people to share their interpretations of what they found there with wide audiences. And so if the archive, whatever it's going to be, facilitates that kind of scholarship, then I'm really excited about it. I hope that whatever happens in the future, some of that material that we saw before it was taken down or the websites were shut down, I hope that material reappears in some way, because listening to Cohen introduce a song in a concert a few days after a major world event, it tells us a lot about how to think about him as a cultural figure. And we used to be able to see him do that. And at the moment we can't. So I'm hoping that comes back.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. And in the process of doing this book, one of the things we realized is that there are lots of people with a stake in Cohen's career and his success, not only his estate, but his agents, lawyers, and a variety of publishers who are all rights holders to differing degrees. And it often can be a deterrent to scholarship if the various people in a network all need to be paid, for example, for access to the materials that we would use to study his work. It adds up very quickly, and the way that some agencies approach it is to find the highest price out there for permission to quote or reproduce, et cetera, and then to raise all prices to meet that across the board. And this is something that is not only an issue with Cohen, but with Joni Mitchell and various others that we've encountered in our studies. So I think if there are any agents, estate members, family members, lawyers out there of Leonard Cohen listening to this podcast, I would say that part of Cohen's legacy depends on the ability of teachers to bring Cohen into their classrooms in one way or another. And we need access to materials that can help us to study Cohen and many other writers. And we create new generations of readers and listeners by getting that kind of access to keep us publishing new stuff on these writers. So, so the estate, I think, stands to benefit greatly by, and they would also provide a great service if they can collect these materials and give us access to them in a way that helps us to study these texts and these times, because they're not just individual texts, but whole pictures of culture.
Mm-hmm. And we did, we have permission to quote from Cohen in our book, for example. So we have had lots of conversations with his estate and his literary agent and things like that. And we have a good relationship with them. But it's just with something that's as big as this, it's sometimes hard to navigate. And so if we want to make Cohen available for people to study in multiple different ways, then that means like making it easy, not only to access, but also to quote and those sorts of things in terms of time and also money. But I look forward to the kinds of scholarship that could happen if more people get to read Cohen's drafts and watch him play in the 1970s. Like there's so much more we could talk about if more people get to see that stuff.
Right. Great. Well, Kate and Joel, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for being on the program. This was really fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was fun for me too.
Yeah, it's been our pleasure.
You just heard from Kate Pinder, Associate Professor in the Department of English and Theatre at Acadia University, and Joel Deshay, Associate Professor of Canadian Literature and Film at Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland. Kate and Joel are co-editors of the contemporary Leonard Cohen, Response, Reappraisal, and Rediscovery, recently published by Wilfrid Laurier University Press, which provided support for this series. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.